Hey everyone, this time we read Game After, a cultural study of video games afterlife. This is a really cool book because it doesn't go into really the history of video games too much, and some of the times that it does, it has a few errors, but we'll talk about them later. This book mostly focuses on preserving video game history, which is a really cool concept, and it's not something that I've read a whole lot about in books. It's more of things I've seen on YouTube videos and in blogs, that sort of thing. Now, what Raiford talks about is a lot of the challenges with coming up with like a museum or an archive or what's called a historical collection of video games. There are quite a few challenges that go into it. A lot of it has to deal with private collectors like myself. I could see how I might be a problem to actually coming up with a historical archive of this. And also, he talks about sort of how you would display video games in a museum or display video games for public consumption. Because there are a lot of challenges and a lot of issues that you'd need to work through in order to really make it do exactly what you want it to do. Now, some of the things that he talks about, especially when it comes to arcades, those are some of the huge problems that would come up when you're trying to create sort of your own archive or your own like exhibit, because you would have to sort of figure if you want to have like a MAME arcade or if you want to have them on an emulator on a computer or if you want to try to get like the original arcade cabinets. What Raiford talks about is trying to get things as close to like the actual experience you had when you played these games. Some of that I think matters, others I think you could probably get away with it if you just want people to have the experience instead of like giving somebody an immersion into it. So if you gave somebody an immersion, it would be, here's the carpeting at the time, here's like the entire room that you would see, kind of like what they do at Portland Retro Gaming Expo, sorry about that, where they have like an entire room set up for like this is what video games in the 80s would have been like. That would have been something that's more like an immersion. Just the experience, I think you could probably get away with it on like a clone console or something along those lines. But if you want people to really see like what the original hardware was like, that would be a little bit different and it would be somewhat harder, especially if you want them to see sort of the changes over the years of hardware. Like, do you include all the variants and that sort of thing and explain why the variants are different? There's just a lot of issues that go into it. For example, there are two versions of the Model 1 Sega Genesis. One of them has high definition graphics on the on like the dome where you would insert the cartridge. The other one doesn't, and the big difference is the one that doesn't is kind of a cheaper model than the first one. It's one of those weird, quirky things that, you might not really need to explain to somebody in a museum, but it would be cool for some people to know about those things. He then goes into a really cool discussion about sort of like single-use objects, which I'm going to butcher how you pronounce this word, but I think it's pronounced inferior. And those are really cool, and I just want to show you a bunch of those right now. So Chapter 4 talks a lot about single-use items. Now, what Raiford uses the definition for this is, oh my god. Now, in Chapter 4, Raiford talks a lot about single-use items, like bus tickets, or receipts, or tickets to, like, sporting events, that sort of thing. Items that are printed out on paper that you really only use once or so, and then you kind of throw them away. Now, this has to do a lot with game boxes. You can kind of tell a lot about the video game history just from their game boxes in general. You can kind of see here like how Sega changed from Alicia Dragoon here with the
nice grid pattern to this nice one without runners, and then eventually went to like a cardboard box similar to Nintendo and Super Nintendo. Now these game boxes generally got just thrown out and whatnot. Nobody really cared too much about them, at least I didn't when I was growing up. What's really cool is you can see some of the differences from the different companies. Like, this is not an official Atari game box. There are a lot of other ones that were used. And even just seeing the price sticker on it is kind of cool for video game history. Now there are other ones as well, like the rental cases. These are ones you don't really see too often anymore, mostly because rental companies just went out of business. But these are really important for video game history as well. And then you've got the manuals, and I want to show you this one because it's really the coolest one that I have, at least the one that I really like. There's this section in the back for notes and high scores. And every once in a while you find something really awesome like this, where this nice guy, I believe his name is Eddie, but it's kind of hard to read, but he put in his actual high score and he dated it for R-Type. That's really amazing to see, and it's just, wow, like from a historical standpoint, it's just so cool to see that, because you don't really get it anymore, and it's something that I feel it's kind of missing a little bit with modern day games, but some companies still try to get it in there as best they can. You can also tell just like the overall evolution of game boxes, and you can see a little bit more with like what the games looked like. Take Legionnaire here for the Atari 400 computer. Well, this is also compatible with the 800 as well, but whatever. What I like about this one is, one, I have it complete in box, and two, it's just so crazy, because you can see like the old postcards that come with these, where they're just trying to get like as much data as they can from you on these games. I'm so glad that whoever had this did not fill this thing out and send it in, because it's just really amazing. You also get to see their really not that well-inspired advertisement for video games. Most people did a lot better job than Avalon Hill, but it is what it is. And then you just get to see what they used to look like. I mean, my god. I don't even understand the technology behind the audio cassette games, but it's just so cool to see those, because you really just don't get a chance to see them very often.
The next thing that Raiford goes into is his trip out to New Mexico, to where the Atari landfill is. I don't really like a lot of this chapter because he makes some points in this which don't really add up, and they aren't necessarily backed up by things. He talks about how there's a lot of information on the landfill out there and a lot of it contradicts itself, which is kind of weird because Raiford's a historian. He works at Stony Brook University, and he created his own video game archive and his own collection there. He doesn't seem to have really done his research on the landfill, because he talks about just some things that have been disproven. I can kind of give him a pass because he did a lot of his research from 2008 to 2012, so some of the things that he's talking about may have been disproven after the fact, or they were in a place that he didn't go looking for them. Part of that is probably because he didn't use a lot of internet-based sources to do his research, and I wish he had, because it would have given him a better perspective on some things. And it's a very weird thing to go into. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about a couple of things he mentioned regarding the Atari landfill. So let's just go ahead and get this over with now, because it's one of the few history things in this book that I really want to talk about. Raiford does do a few things really cool in this chapter. One is he talks about all the interviews that he conducted with people that were there at the time that Atari was dumping its warehouse into the Alamogordo landfill. This is a really cool thing because he's getting a lot of primary sources from people. Even if it is 30 years after the fact, it is really awesome that he was able to go out there and get them. And you do get a lot of really fun stories, like how people would go out to the landfill and dig up games and sell them to the pawn shops, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. What we talk about really with the landfill is ET, but I want to back up and talk about Pac-Man a second, because Pac-Man really set off the video game crash, in my opinion. Atari spent a lot of money fighting lawsuits to get rid of Pac-Man clones and defending their right to produce the home console version of Pac-Man. In my opinion, they wasted a lot of money doing this because they didn't really focus too much on the actual game itself. As you can see, it's not really as good as what Pac-Man could have been or really looked like in the arcades. So by the time you got around to ET, after Pac-Man was just an absolute disaster for Atari, they had to produce too many ET cartridges to try to make up for the fact that they had overproduced Pac-Man. There were there still are over 12 million copies of Pac-Man floating around, and at the time there were only 10 million Ataris in people's homes. So they had to rush something out to kind of make up for the fact that they didn't sell all 12 million, and they also had a lot of returns on Pac-Man, which also happened with ET as well. So yeah, then Raiford gives us his final thoughts, which make a lot of sense. He still reiterates a lot of the things where you're going to have a lot of challenges when you come up with your own video game museum, especially when it comes to displaying things and also getting a hold of all of the parts of the video games to really display to people. So like the boxes, the manuals, recreating some of the things that you had to do back in the 80s and 90s just to buy video games. He kind of, I think, misses an opportunity to talk about computer games and kind of like handhelds and some of the other things that are video games but don't really go on like home console and arcades. I can understand why he only focused on home consoles and arcades because that's a little bit easier to talk about, and he was really doing this research by himself, so he probably didn't have that much time to do it. And to go into like computer games, that's just a whole different animal because there are so many different versions of the computers that you have to get, and each one has a video game that's a little bit different. So the graphics on one are not going to look as good as the graphics on another. Some games aren't going to be on this computer, but they'll be on this one. It's just a whole tangled mess. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please let me know in the comments below. Next time, we are going to be reading a really fun book that I hope won't get me into too much trouble here on YouTube. It is Fuck Yeah Video Games by Daniel Hardcastle. I am really looking forward to this one because it starts off with a whole lot of his thoughts on different video games. So I just really think that one's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, guys, I will talk to you all later, and have a great day.